Dear Mr. Inbar, dear ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I'd like to say thank you for the invitation to Besa Center here in Tel Aviv. And I'd also like to say thank you for the cordiality of your welcome. I have to confess, this is my first time in Israel, and this is why I'm a little bit nervous, because I will talk about your own history, and this in a language that is not my first language. So mostly I need a few hours to get used to speak in English, but now I'm the first one this morning, and I hope I will manage it, and I won't disappoint you. So Mr. Inbar said, already mentioned the title. I changed the title once again because it seemed to me very complicated. The original title, From Adenauer's Policy of Indemnification to Israel's Reservation Against the Reunification of Germany. So I changed the title into Israel and Germany, the Development of Relations 1951 to 1989. Unavoidably, this is, of course, a German point of view, and I hope you can, in the discussion, you can complete this point of view, because I will mostly talk about the German point of view concerning the relations between Israel and Germany. So to start, I give you an overview about the first 4 decades between 1951 and 98. Basically, the German-Israeli relations after World War II are characterized by 3 factors. First of all, by the National Socialist genocide of about 6 million Jews during the war, then by the economic interdependencies between Germany and both Israel and the Arab states, and finally by the thus resulting societal complications and political misunderstandings. I will take these 3 factors into account, talking about first the stony road to diplomatic relations, 1951 to 1965, the period of misunderstandings, 1966 to 1981, and finally the past that will not pass, 1982 to 1989. First, the stony road to diplomatic relations. After the catastrophe, Germany was under a harem. Nobody had imposed it, still it was omnipresent, writes Israeli historian Dan Diner. Right since the 2 states had been founded, the genocide of the European Jews was a burden nobody could shoulder. After such a barbarian deed, neither reparation, I think you call it shilumin, nor atonement, kapara, were possible. The common expression in Germany for reparation is Wiedergutmachung, for which there is no literal translation into English. It might be expressed by something like repair or heal, but how was such a crime supposed to be repaired or healed? The debt would not return. The history of pardoning came to its end at Auschwitz, as Jewish philosopher Vladimir Yankelevich has put it in a nutshell. Even more, in this politically difficult period immediately after the end of the war, it was Konrad Adenauer's great achievement to make attempts at a fresh start. Shortly after the founding of the Federal Republic of Germany in 1949, in an interview with the Wochenzeitung der Juden in Deutschland, the weekly newspaper of Jews in Germany, he announced that the Federal Republic of Germany, being the legal successor of the German Reich, would face the committed injustice and at least pay compensation. In his government statement on the occasion of the Jewish New Year celebration on September 27, 1951, Adenauer once again underlined the moral and material necessity of reparation. In the course of major diplomatic efforts to which there contributed in particular the economist and CDU member of the Bundestag, Franz Böhm, on the German side, and the chairman of the Jewish Claims Conference, Nahum Goldman, on the Israeli side, in Luxembourg in 1952, one actually succeeded with making an agreement. It provided for Germany to pay some millions of Deutschmark to Israel, the so-called Luxemburger Abkommen. Payment happened by way of goods deliveries. For example, steel, iron, chemical and agricultural products to support Israel with building the new state. In Germany, soon there were critical voices saying Israel had no right to reparations, as it had been non-existent during the NS rule. For this reason, Walter Hallstein, Under-Secretary of State in the Department of Foreign Affairs, insisted on pointing out that these payments were voluntary. What made matters worse was the fact that many Germans already showed an attitude of drawing a line under what had happened. David Ben-Gurion in Israel, on the other hand, had to defend himself against accusations of, I quote, taking money from the devil, unquote. Doubtlessly, he was trying not to lift the harem on the one hand and, for reasons of state, to achieve compensation from Germany on the other. Ben-Gurion was not deterred by class militant, pro-Soviet and Jewish nationalist comments. After Germany had allowed for private action by the surviving relatives of the victims of NS terror, in 1957, for the first time that means David Ben-Gurion, he demanded the establishment of diplomatic relations. But due to the ongoing crisis in the Middle East, after the Suez crisis in 1956, due to the ongoing crisis in the Middle East and the fear of the Germans that the Arab states might react to the FRG's claim to sole representation by recognizing the GDR, at first, one strived only for military cooperation. As a consequence, defense ministers Franz Josef Strauß and Shimon Peres made agreements on arms deliveries. Thus, between 1959 and 1967, there happened a mutual supply with military equipment and arms. When in 1959, an article in the Spiegel magazine, one of the most popular magazines in Germany, that has also a political influence in Germany, titled Granaten aus Haifa, Shells from Haifa, reported about Israeli exports to Germany. Soon there were speculations about the delivery of German armaments to Israel. And in Israel, Menachem Begin, whose parents had been murdered by the Nazis, asked provocatively, I quote, "Are those who washed their hands with Jewish soap supposed to also carry Jewish weapons?" Unquote. Apart from these quarrels, the first civilian projects were started. In 1958, it was Aktion Sühnezeichen, which supported social projects and provided help by German youth for NS victims. As well as in 1959, the Minerva Foundation, established by the Max Planck Society, which since then has been supporting German-Israeli academic cooperation. During the legendary meeting of Ben-Gurion and Adenauer in New York in 1960, there were indeed constructive conversations about further economic aid and armament deliveries, but the so-called Aktion Geschäftsfreund, which was to be fiercely opposed by Foreign Minister Gerhard Schröder in 1961, did not say anything about diplomatic relations. Second, the period of misunderstandings. This was to change soon. In the early 1960s, the trial against Adolf Eichmann, chief organizer of the deportation of the Jews, not at last illustrated the insufficient efforts to cope with the past. Furthermore, in the following years, there was increasing moral pressure by the Protestant Church, the German Federation of Trade Unions, as well as several media to establish diplomatic relations. The breakthrough was on May 12, 1965, due to the important contribution and political skillfulness of Federal Chancellor Ludwig Erhard, and after month-long difficult and sometimes interrupted negotiations. Mr. Inbauer already mentioned the 50th year of German-Israeli diplomatic relations. Levi Eshkol commented on this success at the Knesset. He said, on March 7th, the Federal Republic of Germany announced its decision to establish diplomatic relations with Israel. On the same day, Federal Chancellor Erhard sent a special envoy to Jerusalem to negotiate some still unsolved problems between Israel and the Federal Republic of Germany. On March 14th, the government decided to accept the Federal Republic of Germany's offer to establish diplomatic relations with Israel as soon as possible. Just at the time when in Frankfurt the first Auschwitz trial came to an end, former Wehrmacht officer and close confidant of Hallstein, Rolf Pauls, went to Israel as the Federal Republic's first ambassador. He was received with stones, but then in 1969, Israel said goodbye to him with roses. In Germany, Asher Ben Natan became the first ambassador of Israel. He was a popular figure and has won many friends for Israel in Germany. But of course, I don't have to tell you anything about Asher Ben Natan. I think he died last year in Tel Aviv. Yeah, is it right? Yeah. In those days, nobody believed in earnest that there would be a normalization of relations. However, on the other hand, nobody had foreseen that despite the inauguration of embassies, the relations between Israel and Germany would become so complicated, especially, or in particular, during the period of the social liberal government. Although still during the 6 Days Wars in June 1967, the mood was pro-Israel. Already at that time, a good deal of the German left considered Israel nothing than a quote, bridgehead of US imperialism, unquote. Then, when the assassination of Israeli sportsmen and women at the Olympic Games in Munich in 1972 was followed by Palestinians hijacking a Lufthansa plane, and the federal government paid for the release of its passengers by releasing members of the Black September terrorist group, Israel was shocked by the attitude of the Federal Republic. Just a short parenthesis. When I was flying from Frankfurt to Tel Aviv yesterday, I met Professor Martin Lemmer from the Sports University in Cologne, and he told me that after the assassination of the Israeli sportsmen and women, there were, besides the elite political cooperation, there was a very deep cooperation in sports, though Israel was very shocked about the attitude of the Federal Republic of the Federal Republic. So it's very interesting that the sports cooperation was much deeper than before, after that. More and more, the Federal Republic of Germany got caught in a crossfire. The October War of 1973 and the oil price shock marked the beginning of a period of misunderstandings. Its first peak in 1975 was the UN resolution on Zionism, supported by a majority of the Arab states, which labeled the movement as, I quote, racial discrimination, unquote. At that time, Foreign Minister Hans-Dietrich Genscher's relationship to his colleague Yigal Allon was definitely good. Indeed, they were almost on a friendly footing, but after the change of the Israeli government in 1977, at the latest, the relations became frosty again. General Moshe Dayan and Menachem Begin deeply disapproved of the rather pro-Arab orientation of the Federal Republic in the late 1970s. Furthermore, there was much disagreement about Israel's withdrawal from the Sinai and the peace treaty between Israel and Egypt of 1979, according to the Camp David Agreement of 1978. You know, this is why Sadat and Begin became the Nobel Prize of Peace in I think 1979. But that was far not all. The public debate in West Germany on a statute of limitation for NS crimes, as well as the French-German armaments deals with Syria and weapons deliveries to Saudi Arabia, put the relations of the two states to an acid test. To make matters worse, FDP politician and member of the German Bundestag, Jürgen Möllermann, accused Israel of state terrorism, and in 1980 the European Council recognized the Palestinians' right of self-determination. In a way, the PLO was recognized as the legitimate representative of the Palestinian people. However, the biggest gap opened between Federal Chancellor Helmut Schmidt and Prime Minister Menachem Begin in 1981. It was triggered off by the debate on selling Leopard 2 tanks to Saudi Arabia, as well as by Schmidt's refusal to visit Israel. There followed mutual imputations and defamations, together with criticism of the Israeli settlement policy and the Lebanon war. Most of all, the massacres of Sabra and Shatila under the eyes of the Israeli army triggered loud protests all over Europe. Third, the past that will not pass. At first, these misunderstandings seemed to go on after the change of government in West Germany. For also Federal Chancellor Helmut Kohl had a bumpy start when in early 1984 he made a speech at the Knesset during which he philosophized about the mercy of late birth. The Spiegel once again commented on this by the following words, I quote, "Like a flag, the Chancellor holds out his clean conscience. However, like any German accompanying him in Israel, wherever he goes, he must be aware that this arms dealer normality is not in line with the historical responsibility he claims. The Chancellor refers to his parents, his sons, and ad nauseam to his date of birth and to Martin Buber to present his personal preconditions for a normal relationship to Jewry," unquote. Also, Ronald Reagan's visits to Bitburg in 1985 triggered a fierce debate, as at Bitburg there are also graves of members of the Waffen-SS. Originally, the visit by the US president was meant as a gesture of reconciliation on the occasion of Germany's surrender in May 1945. A few days later, Federal President Richard von Weizsäcker succeeded with making such a gesture in the German Bundestag, when defining May 8, 1945 as a day of liberation from the inhuman system of National Socialist tyranny. Concerning Israel, he said, "Who judges on the situation in the Middle East should consider what Germans did to their Jewish fellow citizens, which was the cause of founding the State of Israel under conditions which still today burden and endanger the people in this region." Then Weizsäcker addressed the fate on the European Jews. He said, "The genocide of the Jews is unprecedented in history." Thus, he said, May 8th is a day of remembrance. Remembrance means commemorating an event so honestly and purely that it becomes part of one's own self. This is a great challenge to our honesty. Today, we sadly commemorate all those who died in the war and from tyranny. In particular, we commemorate the 6 million Jews murdered at German concentration camps. As a consequence of this speech by Weizsäcker, there developed a heated academic debate in 1986 in Germany, known as the Historikerstreit, the historians' dispute. On the feature pages, one discussed if the Shoah was a unique rupture of civilization. German historian and philosopher Ernst Nolte provoked the debate. His contribution, "The Past That Will Not Pass," triggered a storm of protest because he asked, I quote, "Was not the Gulag Archipelago more original than Auschwitz? Was not the Bolshevik class murder the logical and factual price of the National Socialist racial murder?" Unquote. These questions met wide resistance among intellectuals. Nolte was said to justify anti-Semitism. At that time, there happened a debate on the fear of renewed anti-Semitism. That was the reason why Israel's Prime Minister Yitzhak Shamir expressed serious concerns about German reunification. The disagreements between him and Helmut Kohl could be resolved, but soon there started a series of xenophobe attacks in Rostock, Lichtenhagen, and Mölln. Maybe I don't know if you know the cities Rostock, maybe you know it's a quite big city in the north of Germany, and Lichtenhagen and Mölln are very small towns you maybe do not know. Started xenophobe attacks in these towns, among others, of course. These inhuman deeds worried also Israel. Once again, it seemed as if indeed the pass would not pass. And thus, in this situation, the criticism Martin Walser expressed in his speech on the occasion of being awarded the Friedenspreis des Deutschen Buchhandels, Peace Prize of the German book trade, claiming that the remembrance culture was being ritualized, including National Socialism. This looked like an inflammatory speech and obstacle to the German-Jewish dialogue. Because a world, Walser said, I quote, "where everything must be atoned for would be a world I would not like to live in," unquote. However, it might be more advisably to remain true to the words of Dan Diner once again, who pled for a Gordian solution some time ago. He said, "We have to fight anti-Semitism as if there is no Arab-Jewish, no Israeli-Palestinian conflict. On the other hand, we should be conducive to a lasting solution for both sides as if there is no anti-Semitism." This, of course, is still a task for today's policy.